Hello, my name is Jonathan Day, and my research presentation is on the Apple encryption dilemma entitled Encryption, Ethics, and San Bernardino. It starts with the terrorist attacks in San Bernardino on December 2, 2015, when Syed Rizwan Farouk and his wife Tashfeen Malik opened fire on a work party of Farouk's colleagues from the county's health department, where Farouk worked as a health inspector. Armed with semi-automatic pistols and rifles, Farouk and Malik fire more than 100 rounds of ammo and leave behind 3 explosive devices, where it is widely believed that they intended to detonate explosives in an attempt to kill first responders tending to the wounded, though luckily none of the bombs were in fact detonated. 14 people are killed and 22 others are wounded in the attack, which took place in just 3 minutes, as the first police units were actually on scene within 4 minutes of the first shots, and Farouk and Malik flee in a rented SUV. Farouk was actually identified from his build and voice by co-workers who survived the attack, and so plainclothes officers were on a stakeout of Farouk's home when they spotted Farouk and Malik leaving their home at approximately 3 p.m. The officers gave chase, and more officers from 9 other agencies eventually joined in the pursuit. At least one fake explosive device is thrown from the SUV, and as the suspects exit the freeway and stop briefly at a red light, police could see them putting on tactical gear and grabbing rifles, after which Malik begins shooting at police through the back window of the SUV. The chase continues through a residential suburban neighborhood, with suspects still firing out of the car as the police are in pursuit. It ends with a standoff. At 3:09 p.m., Farouk stops the vehicle in the middle of the street, and while Malik is providing cover fire, Farouk attempts to flank the first officer on the scene. Police, though, are quickly able to outflank him, and Farouk, who is shot multiple times and killed. Malik continues to fire at police from inside the SUV, and SWAT teams and armored vehicles circle the SUV, and Malik is then also killed due to multiple gunshot wounds. In the investigation, police positively identify Farouk and Malik as the perpetrators of the attack, and the FBI takes over as the lead investigators. Neither shooter had a criminal record or part of any watch list, and within the first week of the investigation, over 400 interviews and 320 pieces of evidence are collected by the FBI. On December 16, 2 weeks after the attack, FBI Director James Comey states that prior to ever even meeting each other, the two expressed a joint commitment to jihadism and martyrdom in private online conversations. ISIL describes the perpetrators as supporters and then as soldiers of the caliphate in separate radio addresses. This brings us to the Apple iPhone controversy. Both Farouk and Malik destroyed their personal phones, but Farouk's work phone, which was an iPhone 5C, was recovered from the rented SUV and logged as evidence. Farouk's iPhone used passcode-protected device encryption, which after 10 failed attempts to unlock the device, the phone would automatically delete the encryption key needed to unencrypt the phone's data. The NSA was first tasked with bypassing the security features of the phone, but were unsuccessful. The FBI then sought through the courts via the All Writs Act to compel Apple to assist in accessing the phone's data. And the All Writs Act of 1789 is the primary legal argument used in this case, which is Chapter 28 of U.S. Criminal Code, Section 1651, and states that A, the Supreme Court and all courts established by act of Congress may issue all writs necessary or appropriate in aid of their respective jurisdictions and agreeable to the usages and principles of law. And B, an alternative writ or rule nisi may be issued by a justice or judge of a court which has jurisdiction. The current form of the Act was passed in 1911, and in layman's terms, it is just a means of issuing a court order in the event that no existing law exists to deal with the issue at hand. And any successful application under the All Writs Act must meet very specific criteria. First, there must be the absence of alternative remedies. A warrant or subpoena and any other writs would only result in obtaining unusable encrypted data on the phone. It's essentially just a brick. And no current law exists that could compel a company to comply with the FBI's request, so it meets the requirements under the first requirement of the All Writs Act. Second requirement, an independent basis for jurisdiction. Counterterrorism investigations fall under the category of aid in existing jurisdiction, so it meets that requirement. 3, necessary or appropriate in aid of jurisdiction. Obtaining the unencrypted data on the phone would not be possible without the approval of the writ, making it necessary in the opinion of the Department of Justice. And then 4, usages and principles of law. and the request does not violate any existing law, at least as determined by the U.S. District Court Judge Pim, who signed this into a court order, though Apple will disagree. The court order itself says that for good cause shown, it is hereby ordered that Apple shall assist in enabling the search of a cellular telephone pursuant to a warrant of this court by providing reasonable technical assistance to assist law enforcement agents in obtaining access to the data on the subject device. Apple's reasonable technical assistance shall accomplish the following three important functions. It will bypass or disable the auto erase function whether or not it has been enabled, which we know that it had been. It will enable the FBI to submit passcodes to the subject device for testing electronically via the physical device port, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, or other protocol protocol available on the subject device. And it will ensure that when the FBI submits passcodes to the subject device, software running on the device will not purposefully introduce any additional delay between passcode attempts beyond what is incurred by Apple's hardware. So essentially, they want Apple to develop software which will remove the ability to delete the encryption key and then allow for unlimited and rapid-fire entry of passcode attempts until the phone is unlocked. And Apple opposes the order. They're given 10 days to comply until February 26, 2016. And Apple calls the order an overreach by the U.S. government and says that the implications are chilling. They say that no government has ever asked for similar access before, saying that not even China has asked to do something like this. And in a letter to the public from CEO Tim Cook, he says that the order amounts to building a backdoor into the iPhone and is something we consider too dangerous to create. Tech giants Google and Facebook voice support of Apple's position that the court order threatens the privacy of everyone. And Apple's defense against the court order is that since the order requires Apple to write the code to bypass the security features, that that it would violate their First Amendment right to free speech by effectively forcing the company to say something against its will, which has some precedent in that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in 1999 that computer code is protected speech under the First Amendment. And they also argued that any backdoor created runs the risk of falling into the wrong hands, which would jeopardize the privacy of all iPhone users, and that if upheld, the court order would set a dangerous precedent of requiring tech companies such as Apple to assist in criminal investigations, turning private businesses into agents of the government. The Department of Justice then files a new application, and federal prosecutors state that rather than assist the effort to fully investigate a deadly terrorist attack by obeying this court's previous order, Apple has responded by publicly repudiating that order, referring to the letter to the public by CEO Tim Cook. The new application would allow Apple to push the software update to the phone from its own premises, whereby the FBI would then access the phone remotely to obtain data, and then Apple could then remove the software and destroy it. San Bernardino's DA filed an amicus brief, which an amicus brief is it's a brief filed by an unrelated party in support of an existing case. So in this case, Mike Ramos, the district attorney for San Bernardino, filed a brief suggesting that Farouk's iPhone may contain information confirming the presence of a third shooter. The brief cites 2 911 calls which reported the involvement of 3 shooters, and eyewitness Sally Abdelmajid insists there were 3 shooters. The FBI hasn't ruled out the possibility of a third suspect at this time, and the brief also says that the phone may contain a cyber pathogen which could harm local infrastructure, though the Department of Homeland Security declined to comment on the possible cyber threat. And the case would have continued to work its way through the courts, except that on March 28, 2016, the case is dropped. The DOJ announces it has unlocked the iPhone and it's withdrawing its suit against Apple. Reports vary about how the iPhone was unlocked. Initial anonymous sourcing said an Israeli company named Celebrite was responsible, and later reports cited that professional hackers were paid $1 million by the FBI to perform a zero-day exploit used to bypass the 10-try limit. A Freedom of Information Act request was made to determine who to disclose who was hired to hack the phone and then how much the hackers were paid, though this is denied in a summary judgment who found in favor of the FBI, citing protection of sources and methods. And this case really brought attention to the use and potential abuse of the All Writs Act. The American Civil Liberties Union issued a study of the All Writs Act and discovered that the uses had become basically ordinary, which brings into question whether they meet the high requirements for their use. There are at least 63 instances of governments filing all writs applications to compel tech companies to unlock encrypted devices between 2008 and 2016, with Apple alone identifying an additional 12 pending all writs cases, which were not included in the study because they did not yet have official docket numbers. They are all primarily used, not all, but they were primarily used in investigations into drug crimes. Which brings us to the ethical considerations of this dilemma. Apple from a virtue ethics perspective. Virtue ethics focuses on doing the right thing at the right time in the right way and for the right reason. And Apple is exercising the virtue ethic of restraint and standing up to the FBI as they're behaving virtuously and protecting the privacy of their customers who have placed their trust in the company to ensure their privacy rights are respected. And former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Stimson is famously quoted as saying, "Gentlemen, do not read each other's mail," in response to his decision to stopping the U.S. State Department from engaging in espionage, which is an example of virtue ethics in the book as it relates to privacy specifically. And the FBI from a virtue ethics perspective. Virtue ethics also places emphasis on intent, a lot of emphasis on intent. And so part of the ethical framework is not just doing the right thing, but doing the right thing for the right reason. And Apple is acting selfishly to protect their brand at the risk of national security, at least according to federal prosecutors. And because their motives aren't pure, they're behaving unethically regardless of whether they're making the right decision or not. Whereas the FBI is working in the pursuit of justice. And because they're doing what they believe is the right thing for the right reason, their actions are virtuous. And Apple from a deontological ethics perspective. Deontological ethics is rule-based with a focus on adherence to categorical imperatives according to our textbook. And a categorical imperative requires that you would act only in a way that you're willing to have made a universal law, and that you treat people as an end in themselves and never as a means to an end. And Apple is following a categorical imperative of respecting the privacy of others and thereby fulfilling their moral obligation to customers. And the FBI is deontologically unethical due to their attempt to use Apple as a means to an end instead of an ends in itself. And then there's the FBI's deontological ethics perspective, which is that deontological ethics is rule-based and also focused on duty and one's moral obligation. The FBI behaved ethically as they have a duty to protect the citizens of the United States and acted in accordance with all the laws of this country in their pursuit of justice. And Apple is deontologically unethical because of their use of the terrorist privacy as a means to an end in the form of public relations instead of a means in itself. And then Apple's utilitarian ethics perspective. Utilitarian ethics is a consequence-centric theory whereby the ethical choice is the one which provides the greater good for the greatest number. There have been 66 acts of terrorism in the United States since 9/11, resulting in 175 deaths, not including the deaths of terrorists. And Apple currently has over 1 billion devices in current use. I mean, this is across, iPhones, iPads, Apple Watches, Apple TV, Apple HomePods, through all the products over 1 billion devices. And while any death is tragic, Americans are more likely to actually shoot themselves by accident, be killed by a toddler, killed by police, than they are to be killed by a terrorist, which means that the greater good is served by protecting consumers' privacy rather than acquiescing to the requests of U.S. intelligence agencies. And then the FBI, from a utilitarian ethics perspective, is fairly straightforward. The security of the masses outweighs the privacy of one individual. I mean, the argument that helping bypass the security of the phone would somehow jeopardize any other user's security is completely unfounded, says the FBI. And they also argue that Apple is potentially putting the lives of Americans at risk needlessly in order to maintain a certain image in spite of their past history in assisting law enforcement. And in conclusion, in my opinion, Apple has the higher ethical ground, but there are excellent points in support of the FBI as well. Though I believe that the FBI actually has the better legal case despite this, though we did not get to see how it actually played out in court, and Apple does have a strong defense in there being a First Amendment issue and their right to free speech being violated. Thank you for listening, and the following are my references. Have a wonderful day.